Hi, my name's Mary Pence, and I am part of the leadership team of 31st Street Swing Left, a grassroots group started on the East Coast 10 years ago, but now with members across the United States. 31st Street helps me every day turn my anxiety into action. You can learn more about us with our on our website, and the link to that website is being put in the chat. So, our objective today is to help you have better conversations when someone tells you, I don't vote. The next time you canvass, phone bank, or perhaps most importantly, talk to family, friends, or a neighbor, you'll have a comfortable but effective way to respond. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Chur, who uses her keen intellect, empathy, and capacity for listening to save our democracy one conversation at a time. She's written a fabulous book. It's called The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers. It's clearly a labor of love, and it's based on her years of experience phone banking, canvassing, and ballot curing with thousands of voters. She's trained more than 4,500 volunteers nationally in workshops that focus on phone banking and canvassing for introverts, and I count myself as one of those, engaging people at their doors and on the phone who say they don't vote, and using Spanish to connect with voters. And we are thrilled to have so many of you with us today. Elizabeth, thank you so much for all that you're doing and a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary. I am so honored to be here today with all of you. And wow, this is just a great turnout from folks across the country. So thank you so much for giving of your time and your efforts. Before we get started, I'd like to invite everyone to just take a moment to acknowledge how much is going on in our country and the world right now. There's unprecedented corruption in the White House, mass incarceration of immigrants, further gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and so much more. Let's just pause for a moment to acknowledge all of that and to reconnect with why the work all of you are doing is so very important. Thank you. Thank you for being here today and for channeling your energy into doing something to address these huge challenges. So, just a quick overview of today. First, I'll talk about the importance of connecting with people who rarely or never vote. Second, I'll share some strategies for turning I don't vote into the start rather than the end of a conversation. And then we'll demonstrate a few interactions, give you a chance to practice, and wrap up. Afterwards, we hope some of you can stick around for an optional question and answer period. And again, if you haven't had a chance to print out the handout we sent you in advance, or if you happen to sign up in the last couple hours, we're dropping a link in the chat. And now would be a great time to do that. It'll be helpful for our practice sessions later on. So to start, I'd like you to think about what might be possible if we elected Democratic supermajorities at the local, state, and federal levels. What if Democrats not only had the White House, but 80% of the Senate and US House seats? What if there's a big blue wave this fall? What might be possible? Take a moment to dream big. I invite you to share these wonderful visions in the chat. I personally would love to see universal health care. I'd love to see, oh, Amy does too. I'd love to hear what else people would like to see. Stop the bleeding, affordable housing, rebuild the Voting Rights Act, money out of politics, end the Electoral College. Yes, climate action, protection of education, Supreme Court reform, no ice, care about the climate. Yes, oh my goodness. So many wonderful things here. This is so inspiring. And I invite you to keep these great possibilities in the back of your mind today, and also as you do the hard work of reaching out to voters. So now I'd like to give you some context. You may remember back in 2017, Shelley Simons, a Democratic candidate for the Virginia House of Delegates, was tied with her Republican opponent after a recount. The State Board of Elections basically picked one of their names out of a hat to decide the result. And not only did the Republican win the coin toss or the drawing of the name out of the hat, but that meant that the Republicans maintained majority control of the House of Delegates, all because the Democrats fell short by one single vote. She did win that seat in 2019. And when I met her last year, Delegate Simons told me that people still come up to her with this guilty look and they say, "It was me. I didn't vote in 2017, and that's why you didn't win." In 2024, I volunteered for Democrat Adam Gray's campaign in the Central Valley. And as you probably know, he flipped his seat by just 187 votes out of more than 210,000 ballots cast. And when I was in DC last summer, it was such a thrill to visit Congressman Adam Gray's office and to meet with his former campaign manager, now his chief of staff, Ben Rodriguez. In that election, every vote really did count. And we all know how close the 2020 presidential elections were when less than 43,000 voters in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin decided the outcome of the Electoral College. In that election, 34% of eligible voters did not cast a ballot. That percentage is often even higher in midterm elections. By the way, eligible voters is determined from census data and includes citizens age 18 or older who aren't barred from voting because of past felony convictions, depending on the laws in their state. Many of these folks who don't vote are young people, people of color, and lower income voters, people who may be inclined to support Democratic priorities. Of course, some of these people had their votes suppressed. Others just need help navigating logistics like confirming their polling location or how to request a vote by mail ballot. But there is some portion of this group that flat out is not interested in voting. People who rarely or never vote are often labeled low propensity voters. But I like a term used by Anat Shenker-Osorio, a Democratic communications strategist. She calls them high potential voters. It focuses on their strength and their power. If we could encourage even a fraction of these high potential voters to get out and vote, it could have a big impact. Engaging with voters isn't a one size fits all process. Instead, I try to tailor my approach based on how the conversation unfolds. Here, the voter is in blue and my responses are in green. So, if they're a strong or likely Democrat, the traditional approach of mentioning a few of the candidates' talking points and making a plan to vote probably works great. This is essential to any campaign and helps ensure that our strongest supporters have all the information they need to vote. If I encounter someone who would never vote for a Democrat or happens to be rude, I don't try to change their mind. I politely say, "Have a great day," and end the conversation. But at least once each shift, I talk with someone who tells me, "Nah, I'm not voting." Bingo! I have just connected with a high potential voter. But how should I respond? There are three pathways. The first is just to thank them and to end the conversation. Some phone bank and Canvas scripts actually say to do this, but this is a lost opportunity. The second path is to preach at them. Recite all the talking points and tell them all the reasons why this election is so crucial. That usually doesn't work very well. It feels bad to talk at people, and it really feels bad to be on the receiving end of that. The third path requires me to shift gears and to slow down. I try to get curious. Can I view the voter like an anthropologist would? Show empathy and be non judgmental. Listen more than you talk, especially at the beginning. Ask open ended questions, then silently count to 10 to give them a chance to respond. It's challenging, but this approach can make the conversation more effective and satisfying for the voter and for you. Let me tell you about one of my most memorable conversations with a high potential voter. In December 2020, I was calling Georgia for the Senate runoffs on behalf of Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. I spoke with a voter I'll call Ophelia. She was really stressed out and she didn't know there was another election in January. She said, I don't have time to think about politics. I just try to tune them out. She couldn't even remember the name of the president, but she said she didn't like Trump. She described how hard things were with her mother, who had lots of health issues. Even though Ophelia got laid off during the pandemic and her unemployment had run out, she still helped her mom financially. This went on for 25 minutes, and I wondered if I was wasting my time. But she really wanted to talk. I said I was so sorry to hear about her situation and that I had also had a sick parent, and I knew how hard that could be. Then Ophelia asked if I was a Democrat, and I said yes. She leaned that way also, but she hadn't voted in the presidential election. I said, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. She said, I figured Trump was going to win again. So what's the point? I said, well, I'm really glad Biden will be our next president. But it was a really close election, and it showed that we needed every voter. I said, it would be tragic if Biden can't get anything done because the Republicans still control the Senate. In the latest pandemic relief bill, the Democrats wanted to include money for things like extended unemployment benefits, but the Republicans refused. But if the Democrats win these two Senate seats in Georgia next week and gain control of the Senate, we can help people who really need it during the pandemic. I'm wondering, what do you think about that? Something clicked for Ophelia. She said, okay, that's it. I'm going to vote. And I'm going to make sure my family does too. I said, wow, that's great. Could you spread the word to three people you know? She said, yeah, my husband works construction and has 100 coworkers. Most of them didn't vote in November either. But we'll tell them that now that we have a new president, we want to make sure he can get things done. We're Hispanic and we're going to get this going. We'll tell them, get out and vote and then come to the cookout. I said, wow, Ophelia, you are really connected to the community. You and the people you know could decide the outcome of the runoffs. I asked if I could send her information about early voting and text her a reminder on election day. She said, sure. So afterwards, I texted her, and this is part of what she wrote back. God works in mysterious ways. You made my day. Yes, I will take all my friends to the polls. I can literally imagine the poll workers' faces when we walk in. Unfortunately, I don't have a loudspeaker. I would go around town announcing it. Ha ha ha. That's just one example of how eliciting a voter's concerns, trying to respond from the heart, and connecting what they care about with what's at stake in this election can help them draw their own conclusions about voting. There are several touchstones that help me navigate a conversation with voters like Ophelia, who start off saying, I don't vote. The first is that I'm aiming for conversations that are relational, not transactional. Instead of sounding like a fast talking auctioneer or a prosecutor trying to pin down a defendant, I try to bring a relaxed conversational vibe to the conversation. I try to slow down and take my time. It's more important to be effective than to be efficient. The second touchstone is empathy, empathy, empathy. Rather than labeling Ophelia as ignorant or low information, I tried to see things from her point of view. She started that conversation saying she was really stressed out from taking care of her mom. I try to assume that everyone's doing the best they can, and they often have a lot on their plate. Even though the elections might be my number one priority, in her world, caring for her ailing mother probably took up all her energy. I can express this spirit of empathy by acknowledging what they share with me, with phrases like, that sounds really fill in the blank. That sounds really hard. That sounds really sad. That sounds really exhausting. Or it sounds like fill in the blank. It sounds like you're really busy taking care of your mom. It sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. It sounds like you wonder if one vote makes a difference. The third touchstone is 80% them, 20% me. I try to listen more than I talk, especially at the beginning of the conversation. One magic phrase that works on almost any situation is, tell me more about that. Then I count to 10 silently to give them a chance to respond. So if they say, I don't vote, or I haven't voted since Trump was elected, Try saying, tell me more about that. And try to use a tone that conveys friendly, non judgmental curiosity. I also try to ask open ended questions, those that can't be answered with a yes or a no. So if they say, all politicians are crooks, I could say, well, if a candidate who really cared about the community got elected, what would be different in a year? Or if they say, my vote doesn't matter, I could say, if you could change two or three things about the country, what would they be? Not only does this help build empathy and earn respect, but it also allows me to gather intel about their priorities. I might even jot down a few notes about what they tell me so I can refer back to it later in the conversation. When Ophelia told me about getting laid off, having her unemployment run out, and helping her mom with the bills, these were invaluable clues about what might be most important to her. And later on in the 20% me part of the conversation, I looped back to some of these topics and cherry picked a few juicy tidbits from the candidate's platform that directly related to the things that she cared most about. When you're talking with high potential voters, you may hear a lot of something called sustained talk. That's a term that comes from motivational interviewing, an approach developed by the clinical psychologists William Miller and Stephen Rolnick to help people address problems with addiction. But these tools can help support any type of behavior change, like encouraging people to think about voting. Sustained talk is comments that support the status quo, staying stuck where you are, or reasons not to change. You might hear high potential voters say things like, my vote doesn't matter. Politicians do whatever they want. So why bother voting? Or, I voted before, but nothing changed. But slowing down, expressing empathy, and inviting them to tell you more can all help you elicit something else called change talk. That's another motivational interviewing term that involves listening for any little crumbs the voter shares about why they might want to change or what they wish were different about themselves or the world. So when Ophelia said she didn't like Trump, I asked her to tell me more about that. When she said things were hard after her unemployment ran out, I asked how that affected her life. By asking follow up questions about how these things might affect a voter, their family, or the community, you can help draw out their own motivations for change, like how voting might be one step towards making things better. And remember at the beginning of this training when I invited you to imagine what might be possible if we had a big blue wave this fall? Things like universal health care, Supreme Court reform, the Voting Rights Act. If a voter mentions one of those during your conversation, those are all topics that could elicit change talk if you dig for details. Sometimes you really have to listen hard to hear these bits of change talk. This requires patience and persistence. Have you ever seen people on a beach using metal detectors to find buried treasure? They'll sweep that device back and forth across the sand for a really long time. And occasionally they'll hear a beep, 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 beep. And that's when they zero in and start digging. That's what you want to do. You might hear a voter say 9 negative things about why voting doesn't matter. But then they'll mention one little thing, like how they don't like Trump, or how they wish healthcare were more affordable, or how they're angry that gas prices are going up because of the war in Iran. Beep, 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 beep. Start digging by asking them, tell me more about that. Or how would making healthcare more affordable, or how would lowering gas prices make your life better? Often you'll uncover some buried treasure, the start of change talk, which can reveal some of their inner motivations of what they want to be different and why. Later on, you can connect the hopes and dreams that they've articulated to you with how voting can get them a step closer to making those a reality. That's way more powerful than anything I could ever tell them about why voting matters. One of my activist friends, Charlie Varon, described it like this: we're on a mission to name the voters' hidden hopes and their buried yearnings. One last tip. There is a special question called the ruler that can be really helpful for assessing a voter's motivation level towards the end of a conversation. You could say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to vote? With 0 meaning very unlikely and 10 being very likely. If they say a 2, then you could say, oh, interesting. Why isn't that number a 0 or a 1? And they may share some interesting information about why they might be interested in voting. Then you could follow that up by asking, what might boost your 2 to a 3 or a 4? And that could open the door for them to share things that could help them take the next step towards voting. I've used this a lot in the last couple of election cycles, and it's been very effective. So, to help demonstrate all of this, I'm wondering if someone from the audience who has a copy of the handout available can turn on your video and would be willing to practice with me. Okay.
Yes.
Knock, knock.
Uh, who's hello? Hello.
Oh, hi. My name is Elizabeth Chur, and I'm a volunteer with Randy Villegas, who's running for Congress. I'm just wondering, he's asked us to reach out to every person in the community to find out what, if you were in charge of the country, what 2 or 3 things would you change?
Well, I don't vote.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Uh, God, just seems like they're all corrupt to me. I hear stories about them, getting involved with swindles and
Mhm.
financial shenanigans, like you know, uh, any number of things, but
Mhm.
bribes, all this
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And so I just feel like it, I don't want to support that.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like that's disappointing for you that you really want to elect people that have integrity. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I guess I just don't think if I look around myself, it's like I don't even know if I have that high integrity, and anybody I know, does anybody have integrity? It doesn't seem like it.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds hard, and kind of disillusioning in some ways that the folks aren't really living up to what you think our representatives should be. I'm just wondering if someone with integrity were elected, let's just say someone like that existed in the world. How do you think that our country would be better off with folks like that in leadership?
Um, and this is the part where you're counting to 10, which is good because I'm going to pause and take a second here. Um, how would that, how would things be different? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that that's an important thing to you, and so I'm just
Right.
wondering if people like that actually were our leaders, how would things be better in our country?
Well, I guess I could say that I would think that they would be catering less to the political donation
Mhm.
class. I don't know if the word class is the right word, but to the people that give them political donations, and maybe concerning themselves more with uh, their constituents.
Right, right. So they would actually be working for the folks that elected them rather than the people that write them those big checks.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. Yeah, wow. I hope we move in that direction. And could I just share a little bit of information about Randy
Sure.
Vegas? Because I mean, part of the reason, I'm a volunteer, I'm not getting paid to do this. But one of the things that's really impressed me about him is that he has decided not to take any corporate donations. So he is really working for, ordinary folks that have to work full time or maybe multiple full time jobs. And, so that means if he's elected, he would be working for all of us rather than like those rich sort of few people, either individuals or corporations that, have given him tons of money. And, unfortunately, his opponent in this race, who is currently representing the area, has taken
Ames.
um, well, yes, on the state
Oh,
level.
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And
I'm
David
thinking
Bellinger.
that
Yes.
I actually was there in Bakersfield. I've been there twice. So
Okay.
I'm
Okay. All right.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
no longer the door. I'm a
Okay.
fellow canvasser, but
All right. Yeah.
I now I'll go back to Canvas being the door and say that yeah, I don't watch a lot of TV, but
Uh-huh.
I have seen ads of him, and it does seem like he comes from a working class family. So I can kind
Right.
of see what you mean by that.
Right. And I think that that's a really important um, foundation for turning things around, especially in this community. A lot of people don't have a lot of money. They work very hard, but it's difficult. And um, I'm just wondering, um, kind of knowing that, just on a scale of 0 to 10 right now, how likely are you to vote, with 0 being not at all and 10 being very likely?
Oh, I'll, I'll go up from a 0 to a 2. I think I started off as a 0, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah, that's
Interesting.
movement in the right direction, right?
Yeah, what inspired you to kind of move from a 0 to 2?
Um, I would say that the idea that that somebody would not be corrupt that's in office, and the fact that you pointed out a specific thing about that candidate that was related to what I was talking about in terms of political donations from corporations,
Mhm,
was a connection that made sense to me.
mhm. Yeah. And I'm just curious, we have a little time before the election, but I'm just wondering what, if anything, might increase your 2 to maybe like a 3 or 4 in terms of being uh, likely to vote.
So you're talking about the general, and that's in November, I guess.
Right, right.
So we do have some time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, let's I guess, I suppose, learning a little bit more about, other candidates that I guess I would say that if there are other I mean, I guess you're talking about Randy Vegas, but in general, like, is there a movement amongst, candidates to, um be less beholden to donations or campaign reform, finance reform, and stuff like that is something I'm interested in. And if I knew that there was actually some momentum there, with other people, that might be helpful for me.
Right. Well, could I just offer you, there is this website here that I can give you the QR code for. But
URL, okay,
yeah, but you can actually look up who are their top donors, and that can sometimes, I know for me, follow the money. Sometimes it's helpful to know a little bit more about who is financially supporting a campaign, and that helps sort of give me a sense of like what their priorities
sure,
are and where they're
sure.
headed.
What I mean, now I'm actually curious. I probably know about this website, but maybe not. What are you talking about?
It's called, well, in California, it's called calmatters.org. And so you
Right.
can check
Okay.
that out. But, I
Yeah,
can, if you give me your cell phone number, I could just text it to you. And then, when you get a chance, you can take a look.
that'd
But
be great. That'd be
okay,
great.
great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. And may I
Yeah.
give you this flyer and you can just take a look at that to learn a little
Sure.
bit more about Randy? Okay, fabulous.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and I'm excited that that you might consider voting in November. It's going to be very, very close, and it could come down to a single vote, maybe your vote. So
Right.
I hope that that you will consider uh, participating in this election, having your voice heard. And what you care about is really important.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Barnaby. Great to
Yeah.
meet
You have a good afternoon.
you. Okay, you too.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye. All right. Well, thank you so much, Barnaby. Yay. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah. Woo. Um, I'm just wondering, we'll take like 30 seconds to debrief that, but I'm just curious, in the voter role, like, was there anything maybe that helped you maybe reconsider your position, your I don't vote position?
This is a question for me, right?
Yeah, like kind of in
Right.
character or
Okay. Okay. So going back to being canvassed, being the door, being canvassed, and your question again was there anything that helped me consider what?
just voting. Yeah.
Okay. Right. The big picture. Well, I think I already kind of said, I mean, right now, you know, uh, well, I mean, I hear a lot of people talking about a lot of progressive causes, while I may agree with some of the progressive causes, I don't agree with all of them.
Mhm.
But one thing I definitely agree with is the idea that money should be out of politics. I think it's, from my perspective, if politicians were uh, a little bit more clear about that being the main goal, I would feel more um, likely to be engaged, because I don't. There's so many issues, and Democrats, the Democratic Party in particular, as a result of the fact that there's such a wide tent thing, it's just like they embrace so many causes that I'm sometimes yes, sometimes no, but money is a clear thing for me that is a corrupting influence.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being my buddy in this role play, and really appreciate it. And thanks for all you're doing out there in the real
Thank
world.
you, Elizabeth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now I'd like to ask for two other volunteers who also could turn their video on and happen to have a copy of the handout available. And in this scenario, I can ask one of you to be the volunteer, one to be the voter, and then if with your permission, I can stand on the side and like whisper little suggestions in your ear if you need any.
Hi, is Julie there?
Yeah, I'm Julie.
Hi, Julie. I'm a volunteer with Rudy Randy Vega's campaign, and he's running for office for the
Yeah,
state senate.
yeah. No,
I mean, for the senate.
I know who he is. I don't. Yeah, I'm gonna sit with this one out.
Oh, may I ask why?
It's I just feel like it's our politics are kind of broken. I've voted in the past. It hasn't worked out. I don't feel like there's anyone there kind of representing my interests.
Do you know anything about Randy Vegas? Have you had time to look into his positions on things that
I
might be of
kind of
interest
think
to you?
they're all the same. I just like they're all the same.
Can I
Okay.
just pause for 1 second? You guys are doing so awesome. So Rose, can I just mention
Mhm.
a couple things to try out? So I noticed that you asked may I ask why? That's a yes or no question. And do you know
Uh,
anything about Randy? That's a yes or no question. And I
mhm.
think sometimes, especially if people um, are kind of in the I don't vote crowd, they might sort of feel a little judged and like kind of back to the wall, like, ooh, I know that's sort of the wrong answer. Whereas if
Mhm.
you say, tell me more about that, or what, if anything, have you heard? That invites them to tell more, and it doesn't position you as being like the authority and they're like the student
Mhm.
or something. So, would you mind just like rewinding a little bit? When like Julie has just said, I don't vote because blah, 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 blah.
And is it okay if I'm a
Yeah,
little curt? Like
yeah,
I'm just trying
absolutely.
to.
That's realistic.
Okay.
You're actually pretty polite of Kurt.
Okay.
Could you tell me anything about what turns you off about politics right now? What are the things that
It just feels like I get hopeful and I vote for someone, and then once they're there, they're just like part of the machine. They capitulate. There's like very little difference. I think the thing that bugs me the most is just like they're out to save themselves. Like once they're elected, then all they care about is staying in office, and they're
Mhm.
just like doing whatever it takes to stay in office, and they're not actually representing the people that they said they were going to represent. And I think that's true across the board. Like Democrats, Republicans, they're just like professional politicians, and they're not actually representing me.
Right, I hear you. Sometimes that's how I feel sometimes when I'm seeing the state of the country and things aren't happening fast enough. But if you were to choose your ideal candidate, what would you want them to be?
Um, I guess um I would want I think that they need to have some integrity. So they need to have some principles that they don't back away from.
Mhm.
But I also want somebody who's got some like flexibility and intellectual humility, that they're willing to change their mind. They're willing to say, oh, I had this position, it was wrong. So I think a lot of politicians they're either flip-flopping or staying like so rigidly true to their position that they won't actually compromise. So I want somebody who is going to be pragmatic, but also have integrity and stick to their principles. I'm not sure if that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah. I get what you mean. It's all about character, right? And
Yeah.
so the thing that you want is somebody that you can count on that would keep their word.
Yeah, and also just like if they change their mind, I want them to explain why. I'd want them to acknowledge that they're changing their position. I would want them to sort of acknowledge the impact of their actions if they've like made a set of promises that they can't keep. If they said, "Oh, we're going to preserve the library budget or increase it by 10%," and then they get in office and they're like, "Oh no, we can't do that." If they're like, "Okay, I know I promised 10%, but we can't do that, so we're going to do 5%, and here's why."
Mm-hmm. So, um, have you had a chance to, if given you the election right now, would you like to know more about the candidates and where they stand on priorities that might align with your values?
I mean, like I said, I don't, I've kind of lost faith. Like I've been down that road again. I've been down that road before, and it's just, it's like a road of heartbreak. I just don't,
Yeah.
I can't do it anymore.
Elizabeth, help me out.
Yeah. So I think this is such a rich conversation, and we're going to have to wind it up in a second. But I think what I would do is, if this were real life, I would probably hang out here a little longer in terms of affirming. That does sound really heartbreaking. Even maybe try to use a few of the words that they say without parroting. But
Mm-hmm.
gosh, that does sound hard. Or wow, you. It sounds like you lead from your heart, or you really want leaders that kind of deserve to be representing all of us. Someone that can be honest, and I would spend a little more time reflecting back rather than kind of jumping to your agenda, like reflecting back.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe like I put a couple ideas in the chat, maybe like when she was saying, someone that has a spine but also honest, like, I'd love to hear an example of what that might look like. Or have you ever encountered a candidate or a politician that did embody that, or even historically, like someone from the past that was able to do that? Get them talking more about that. And then if you get them sort of turning the ship from the negativity to a positive example, either
Mm-hmm.
real or hypothetical, then even if it was like JFK or something a long time ago, you might be able to build on that to try to gradually get to what, this election, but not leaping too much from like their heartbreak to like here's my great candidate. Julie, just like to wrap up, I guess in your character, is there anything at this point that you think would help you maybe reconsider that I don't vote stance?
I think maybe like a small move, like part of it is like don't try to get me from I won't vote to like yep, I'm out the door, but more like getting me to commit to one very low stakes shift.
What would that be, perhaps?
Well, like you ask for people's phone numbers. That feels a little forward given where we are. But you know, can I maybe like can I text you his website or um I don't know, like would or even just asking like, do you want to keep talking? Like, is it helpful to talk or like maybe check in about like because maybe I'm about to change
Mm.
or like something to just give me a little more room to meet her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes, and that's such a good point that, people who have like never voted or haven't voted in 20 years, just because I show up doesn't mean I'm gonna like say the magic thing and all of a sudden they're leaping out of their chair to vote. But sometimes just even getting them to like think about it, or sometimes I'll say, if we've talked a long time and they're like, I don't know, and well, do you have any friends or family that vote that you respect? And what did they say? Or would you consider maybe checking in with them about blah 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 blah? Because sometimes, they can hear it from a peer or someone they already know in a different way than me. And even that is like a tiny shift, I think, in a positive direction, that rather than just totally walling it off, being willing to engage in conversation. So, it's not always like they totally change their mind through, a short conversation with us, but Rose, you did such a great job of like eliciting some things from Julie,
Mhm.
and getting her to, and the more you can get details, that is, for me, that's where the magic is. The more
Right.
you get
But
details.
how do you steer them from being apathetic to actually considering voting to actually consider voting for a Democrat?
Right. Well, I think often this is a journey of many steps. And so maybe in this one conversation, it's just opening the door a crack to the possibility of maybe voting. And then maybe the next volunteer that comes will need to carry that forward. Or, if you have a really nice conversation, I might offer my phone number and just say, hey, could I check in with you in a month or something? I mean, only if you feel comfortable doing that. But just to be patient
Mhm.
with yourself too, that it's not going to be like a once and done thing, but just starting
Right.
that conversation. A lot of people have told me this is the longest conversation I've ever had about politics, or I don't talk about politics with anybody in my life. And so just the fact that you're there engaging with them actually is a shift. So
Mhm.
I wish we could keep on going, but we kind of need to segue to the next thing. But thank you both
Mhm.
for stepping up. You did a great job, Rose and Julie. Thank you so much for helping us to learn and being such great uh, models here. Thank you so much for participating and really like working those muscles. I know it's not easy, but it's really, I think, where a lot of the good stuff comes in. So I'd like to just take a minute to invite you to put in the chat what's something that went well, or something that you learned, and also just a request, maybe if you could mute yourself now that we're back in the main room, that would be wonderful. If you want to put in the chat anything that you learned or something that went well. Um, Jen says that was great, fun. Makes you want to practice more. That's fantastic. Great. Anything else that went well, or something that you learned from that experience? Impactful to hear what other people are going through. Um, yeah, I didn't want to do it, but it was okay. Good to ask open-ended questions. Good to try it out. Get feedback for others. Uncomfortable, but a good way to practice. It felt nice to be listened to. That's wonderful. Way too easy to be the person who says I don't vote. Um, yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Great. Thank you. All right. And then just invite you to put in the chat what was anything that was challenging, or anywhere that you kind of felt stuck. Um, yeah, puzzled how much to share our personal opinions and experiences. Mm, yeah, anything that was challenging, hard to know what to say next. Yeah, that for me is always a practice. Like, where do I go next in this conversation? It's hard not to jump in and say, don't you know that? Yes, that's a really good observation, to watch yourself. That I think that's a very natural tendency. Uh, let's see, hard not to provide facts. Yeah, it can hard, listening is hard. Listening can be challenging. Transition from the personal issues to the voting. Yes, I feel like that is also something, I think, for me, that has gotten a little bit easier with practice. Okay. All right. Great. Hard not to go in the direction of more talking more than listening. All right. Fabulous. Thank you all so much for this feedback and just sharing what you learned and what was challenging. So, I would like to know if you are willing to commit to phone banking or canvassing at least once in the next month. Could you please raise your virtual or your physical hand? Can I see? All right. Whoa, look at this. We got some good hands up here. Yes, this is really exciting. We together have the power to protect and rebuild our democracy, one conversation at a time. So I would like to leave you with just one last story. In 2020, I called Dallas for a Democratic candidate for state legislature, and I spoke with a 30-year-old named Juan, and he told me, I'm not voting. And I said, "Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that." He said he wasn't a political person, he had never voted, and he wasn't going to vote this year either. I tried to stay curious and non judgmental. This not voting thing is something that I only read about in the paper, but here was a live person who could give me more insight into what goes into that decision. I asked whether his friends voted, and some of them did. They were all over the map from conservative to liberal. They all got along, but they didn't talk much about politics. I asked if he were in charge, what 2 or 3 things he would change about the country. He said everything was fine. He still had a job, and his friends and family hadn't been affected by the pandemic. I said I was glad to hear they were doing okay. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned he wasn't wild about President Trump. And my ears perked up. Beep, 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 beep. My internal metal detector went off. "Oh, really? What don't you like about him?" I said. He said, "I don't like the way he talks about Mexicans." I said, "Yeah, he said some pretty intense things. It's possible that Texas could flip blue this year. The presidential election is going to be really close, but if Texas went blue, that could decide the whole election." He still wasn't interested in voting, so I asked him, "Well, would it be okay to text you information about how to vote by mail? It might give you more options if you decided that you did want to vote. And if you didn't want to vote, you could just throw your ballot away." He said, "Yeah, I could send him information." I also asked if I could call back in a few weeks to check in, and he said, "Sure." I thanked him for his time. We talked for over 20 minutes and said goodbye. I knew it was a long shot, but at least he hadn't hung up on me. So on election day, I called him back. He picked up and he totally remembered me. I said, "Juan, I'm so curious. Did you end up requesting an absentee ballot?" And before I could even finish my sentence, he said, "I already did it. I voted." And I almost fell out of my chair. He said, "Yeah, a couple Saturdays ago, my friend and I didn't have anything better to do. So we looked up the early voting place and it was 5 minutes away. We went there. There was no line. It took less than 10 minutes. And I voted for all Democrats, including that local candidate you told me about." I was blown away. I said, "When we talked, you weren't interested in voting. What changed?" He said, "Honestly, our conversation got me thinking." I said, "Well, what about it?" He said, "The fact that it went on for so long. Other people had called before, but when I told them I wasn't going to vote, they just hung up. You seemed interested in my reasoning without trying to persuade me. You just asked questions and listened." Later, I was frustrated with the crazy things Trump was saying, and I told my friend, "Come on, let's do this." I said, "That's amazing. What would you tell someone else who had never voted?" He said, "It's easy. It doesn't take a lot of time." I asked if he thought he'd vote again, and he said, I guess so. Well, probably. Yeah, definitely, now that I know how it works." And I could almost see his process evolving as he heard himself speak. This is our future. This is how things are going to change for the better, one voter at a time, one conversation at a time. Right now, we have a precious window of opportunity to up our game when engaging with at least 1/3 of the electorate. Voters like Juan and Ophelia, and the many other high potential voters like them. So many elections are decided by a handful of votes. We have an incredible chance to boost our turnout levels compared to previous elections. Until now, we've left a lot of votes on the table, but just think what we could accomplish if we had full participation in our democracy. Let's reach out to every single eligible voter in this year's elections. Let's engage the power of their hidden hopes and their buried yearnings to transform our country together. So now I'll hand it back to Mary, who has some very important announcements, and afterwards we'll open it up for a few minutes of Q&A. Thank you all for being so generous with your time and attention today, and for everything you're doing to strengthen our democracy. Really want to thank each and every one of you. Mary, I'm handing the mic back to you.
Thank you. I just want to say that speaking for myself, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, and I learned more than I thought I would, even though I'm experienced at both phone banking and canvassing. Elizabeth, you model so beautifully for us. And thank you for your concrete examples. That, for me, was particularly meaningful. And to all of you participants, my request is that you put what you learned to use as soon as possible. You know, the best way to get really comfortable with your response, your first response, that first thing you say when someone says to you, I don't vote, is to practice it. And if you check in the chat, you'll find, excuse me, you'll find links to canvassing and phone banking opportunities coming up soon. If you already have an activist home, keep going. But if you don't, you're welcome to join us at 31st Street, swing left. The link to our website is in the chat one more time. Thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Mary. And we will formally wrap up the workshop. But if you have any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or you can just raise your hand using the reaction tab. And we can have a few minutes. We'll let you unmute if you want to ask any questions. Yeah, let's see, Linda.
Hi, yeah, this was great. I'm the one who says I want to practice more. Yeah, but so when you did your role play and he said about I think about donations or whatever, and you had that answer about your candidate wasn't going to, what it sounds like you have to have a lot of information about your candidate for whatever they say, right? You know what I'm saying? He might have mentioned healthcare. He might have mentioned something like that. What if you don't have that kind of, quick answer to that?
Sure. That's a great question. And, I don't want people to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to be like the policy director, to be able to make any calls. Honestly, a lot, I would say at least 70 to 80% of the time I spend is really empathizing, asking them to tell me more. And it's less about spouting off facts. I just happen to know that. And, I think that there is a certain benefit in if there are like a few candidates that you maybe are a sort of a repeat canvasser or phone banker for. Over time, you might get more familiar with their platform. But please don't let that be an obstacle or feeling like you have to be like all knowing before you can go out. Because if that were the case, none of us would ever go out. And, I often, a lot of like the most basic things are, on the flyer that I'm handing out. So, before I go out and hit the doors or start calling, I might just, look at their website or, spend 10 minutes kind of looking at their things. But, I would say a lot of Democratic candidates, like most of them are for, protecting healthcare and Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act and, protecting people with, pre-existing conditions, sort of the general Democratic platform. And if somebody happens to tell you something that you don't know, you ask a question, it's fine to be like, that's a great question. Like, I don't know the answer, but I can give you a website that you can check that out. Or, or if you feel comfortable, you could say, if I find out more information, maybe, would you be willing to give me your phone number and I can text you if I find out something from. So anyway, I just hope that does not serve as a barrier to getting out and canvassing. Because the most important thing, in my experience with the I don't vote crowd, is to say, tell me more about that. Yeah. Jen?
Yes, thank you. I just wondered, somebody else brought up this issue about how some of the scripts that you might get from the phone banking or canvassing identify ourselves as a neighbor or someone from the community. And there are definitely times when I'd like to go outside of my community to canvas, sometimes even outside of my state. And I know you've done that a bit. And so I'm curious how you respond if that comes up as a question, like, where are you from? Or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I would say that comes up less than 5% of the time where people are like, and most of the time it's just curious, like, are you from here? I've only had maybe one or two people say, are you from here? Like with more of an attitude. But I'm always honest about it. And I do, if they, I mean, most of the time they're just curious or they might even be impressed that I have come a long distance to come, talk with folks in the community. And so I never lie. I never say anything. I might say I'm talking with people in the community. I wouldn't say in my community because it's not necessarily my community. And if they press me more on that, I might just say, because of the way our electoral system is set up, this is a very close race, and I'm kind of helping out my friends here in this district because it's all hands on deck. Does that help to answer that? Okay, fabulous. Yeah. Kat? Oh,
Following the last question, yeah, because I do door knocking,
great.
and this has been great. Uh, and we have these scripts, and they're like, stick to the script. You've got to say, "I'm a neighbor." Oh my gosh, how many times have people heard you're a neighbor, you're a neighbor? And I don't want to lie. And then people start asking where you live anyway. And then, but this isn't a lot of scripts that I get, and I don't agree with it at all unless I actually am a neighbor. I could say, a San Francisco neighbor or whatever. But that's a real concern for me when you start out with, if you're really starting out with a lie or something that's kind of, shady, and then people are already so sensitive to, why aren't they voting? Because, what's going on. And so I just did want to say that, there's an expectation I'll just say there's an expectation to follow these scripts.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. And, I think ultimately my take on things is, I need to feel comfortable and feel like what I'm saying and doing is in alignment with my values. And for me, being honest is really important. So I personally would not say anything that's not true. And frankly, when I'm at the door, I would say 95% of the people never ask because they're like, it's so, I think, rare for people to be interested in what they care about. And, the focus, they're like the star of the show, you know what I mean? And most people like aren't that interested. I mean, it's nothing bad about them, but when the conversation is really centering their opinions, their experiences. And so, and I feel like, just respectfully, personally, I feel like we all have to be the arbiters of our own comfort levels. Like, I've had some campaigns say, knock every single door. And so early on, I did the one with the 3 Trump posters and it didn't go so well. So I don't do that anymore. And, I'm such a rule following, like, Catholic girl that I did it at first, but I feel like I'm the one that has to make decisions about my own safety, my well-being, and also my integrity. So I would just say, respectfully, if you don't feel comfortable, just share what is true, and if it's really adamant, there are maybe other ways to volunteer, or other canvases maybe that you could that maybe has a script that or a culture that allows you to be kind of more in alignment with what feels comfortable to you.
Yeah, I just disregard. I just want to share and just hear your input. But yeah, I won't do it. I don't do it. And that's fine with me, but I just wonder what your input would be on those kind of scripts. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Judith?
Okay, I actually have 3 questions, and I don't know if there's time for all that, but so I'd love your comments on the following situations. One is if we're doing phoning to someplace far away. Okay, and particularly phoning because it's very, very easy for somebody to hang up. Easier than to slam the door in your face. So, and a second one is that a lot of times canvassing is done by 2 people together, which change the dynamics. The third question is that there are some trainings that have happened about how it's really useful to go to when one is canvassing, to come with one's own story as to why what one is doing is why one is passionate about this, or come with a story. And so all 3 of those don't quite fit the model, and I just wonder if you have any reaction to any of those.
Sure. Well, so for the first one, the phone, like how to basically get through the first minute of a conversation or the first 10 seconds. I actually was part of a training. I think it's on my website, but there's a navigating the first minute of a conversation. So if you go to my website and go to the resources tab, Carol Blaney and I, she's on this call as well, we have like a whole workshop just on that topic. And I just also want to just say, no matter how amazing you are as a phone banker, people are still going to hang up on you. It's not personal, and it's not like you're not doing it right. I think that's just par for the course. But the workshop was more maybe that you can, up your retention rate from like, maybe 5% to like 7% or something. So maybe check it out and see if any of those things work for you. And a lot of it's just trial and error. The canvassing with the two people, I think it is often recommended that people go out in pairs. Maybe you don't always go to the doors, but you work different sides of the street and you stay within eye contact of each other. I personally like to canvas alone, partly just because I like to take my time at the doors, and I think other people want to move faster, and it can be hard when we have different sort of tempos of doing that. But I think it's again, trust your gut and what you are comfortable with. I think one thing that can be helpful if you go in pairs is maybe you designate like the executive chef and the sous chef. So maybe the executive chef kind of takes the lead on that particular door, and and then maybe the sous chef can chime in a little bit later, but not both trying to jockey for position. That's just something that you can experiment with. But I think it's really personal preference in terms of with a buddy or by yourself. And then just the last thing about kind of coming with a story, I respect that approach a lot, and I think it can provide opportunities to connect with voters. My personal experience, I think maybe my bias, is that I really like to center what the voters' experience is, because especially if they don't, or at the beginning, if they don't know me, I don't think they really care that much about me, and I don't want to like jump in there too fast to hog the mic or hog the stage. Especially, I canvass a lot in like Latino neighborhoods, and I feel like just often people are not used to being asked what they care about or what they would do if they were in charge, and I guess I want to be sensitive to the idea that that it's this show is not about me, you know what I'm saying? And I think later in the conversation, maybe when I've developed more rapport, I might share something with them, but I wouldn't lead with that, because I'm showing up as a stranger. And I think until they have a little bit more investment in the conversation and that connection, that maybe what I've experienced may not be as compelling before I've had a chance to really learn more about them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, there's a
Yeah.
question from early on that I'd love to pass on to you.
Yeah.
What if a spouse or partner interjects in the conversation and then becomes two people not interested in voting, or the second person is more stubborn? What do you do then?
Oh man, yeah, I've definitely had that experience, and especially when I'm connecting with one person and then the partner comes out and kind of torpedoes it, and I just almost want to be like, let's just that can be really challenging. I try, but I keep that inside. I try not to broadcast my frustration with that. I try to connect with the half of the couple that seems a little more interested or engaged, or because I think sometimes the person I remember I was talking with a young couple, they were like in their early 20s, and the girlfriend I think was starting to warm up, and the boyfriend came along and was just super negative about everything, and also I think had been watching a lot of Fox News or something and was saying stuff, and so I realized at first I was trying to engage him and trying to like fact check him. And then I just realized that I need to let go of that and just respectfully so I tried to focus. And it's interesting as the canvasser, it's almost like I have a microphone. And so where I focus my attention can sort of bring energy to that part of that person in the conversation. So if there's two people, I might try to just make more eye contact with the person that is more receptive to that. And then sometimes the person who's super negative about the voting might just get tired of it and wander off. One other thing is that sometimes I know I've talked with couples, and sometimes like the one that's more receptive, like I remember just recently I was out and I talked to the husband first, and then the wife came home. So I talked with the wife, but she had just driven up. So I stayed out with her by the sidewalk. And even though it was really hot and the house looked nice and shady and inviting, but I figured if I stayed a little further from the house, then we'd have a little more privacy. She wouldn't get pulled in with the three kids that needed her or the husband, and so sometimes just trying to pick my spot and strategically maybe trying to focus on the person that seems more receptive. I seem to get a little better traction that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if I don't know if there are any other questions. Oh yeah, Chris, maybe we could just.
There we go. Okay, so my biggest trouble lately has been dogs.
Oh
That
yeah.
the owner is so busy trying to keep the dogs from going out the
Mhm.
door, and they just can hardly listen, and I
Mhm.
just don't know what to do with that.
Um, are you scared of the dogs, or it's more just the
No,
dog is a
no, these are,
distraction?
the owner
With the
is
dog.
taking care that they're not going
Uh-huh.
to harm me or anything,
Uh-huh. Okay.
but it's hard to have the door open. I
Sure.
can't, and it's very distracting. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, I actually, where I canvas, there are a lot of dogs and it's more of a rural area. So I'm actually I'm kind of afraid of dogs. And so
Mm,
I actually always carry dog treats with me. So one thing you
mm,
might consider, if you don't already, is maybe carry dog treats. And if you can say, "Oh, your dog's so cute," and may I give your dog a treat?
mm,
Because I think it's kind of like admiring someone's kids or their grandkids,
mm,
like the way
mm,
to the owner is sometimes through the pet. And
mm,
so if you can get the dog on your side or dog is your new best friend, even though it takes a little longer, I think
mhm.
sometimes that can, and then you're making a nice little connection about something besides politics. And then
Yeah.
usually if the dog gets a treat and then they like you and maybe they quiet down or something, and if anything that maybe gives you an excuse to sit there and talk there a little bit longer with the owner, because you can ask, well, what kind of dog? What's your dog's name? And you
Mm,
chit chat about the dog. How long have you had them? And
mm,
whatever. What's their personality like? And I don't know. Sometimes that can kind of then
yeah.
segue into. But I think it's kind of like if someone had a kid that was really loud or something that just kind of making a human connection around this, because obviously most people are super attached to their pets, so if you make friends with the dog, you're probably having in with the owner.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Well, you all have been like such troopers to stay here extra time and to just show up and practice. It's just been so inspiring to be here with all of you. So thank you for everything you're doing. And you all give me hope in this challenging time. And I hope that you can bring some of these approaches out in the world. And let me know what your experience is, and if any of you have time to come back in 3 weeks to that office hours, if you want to bring back some experiences from the field, or if you have a tricky situation that you want to troubleshoot, that can actually, we can like kind of turn straw into gold. If the thing that makes you scratch your head can actually be a great learning opportunity for all of us. So I hope I might be able to see some of you there. So thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for everything you do. And yeah, have a great night. Thank you, everybody.